Welcome to the Good Food CFO podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Delavan, once again joined by our producer, Chelsea Steer.
Hey, Sarah. Today we have another BABOYOT episode for our audience. And this one is extra special because you might call it a BABOYOT sequel.
That's so true, because today you're going to hear from Emily Winston. She's the founder and CEO of Boichik Bagels. And those of you listening may remember that Emily was actually on, I think, our most listened to episode of season 5 of the podcast when she joined me for her first BABOYOT episode. And, we thought, Chelsea, you and I, as we were planning season 11, and we always do this, we think about, what do we want to talk about? Who do we want to talk to? Who are our BABOYOTs going to be, this year? And so much has happened for Emily and Boichik Bagel and the Boichik Bagel team that we really wanted to reconnect with her and see how things were going, see how things had changed, and get that firsthand, point of view, information, sort of insider, insight into what it's like to be growing a business on your own terms. I remember from our first conversation, Emily talking about turning down certain retail stores, turning down distribution and saying, I understand that this is not the right time for Boichik to go into these channels. And it was very much BABOYOT energy, right? Building a business on your own terms.
Let me actually go back before I edit it when we were developing the episode. And, we both follow Boichik on socials. And so we know they've been doing a lot. They've had a lot going on. But when we sat down to actually plot the timeline of everything that they've done, everything that Emily has done since the last time that she was on, we both kind of sat back and were like, wow.
Yeah. And then embarrassingly, when Emily and I got to sit down together, I just read through everything because she was like, I don't know if I remember the time. And I was like, don't worry, I have it all right here. And I'm going to read through all of it for both of us.
And then exactly. Then when she was actually, sitting down with you and having that conversation, and then I got to edit it, she's a delight. I was laughing the whole way through. So not only do I think is this episode full of great information for founders, but it is also highly entertaining.
Yeah. And I think she, correct me if I'm wrong, Chelsea, if it made the episode or not, she drops some news.
Yes.
Amazing. So
absolutely, she did.
By the time this airs, maybe it's not new news, but there's a potential that the Good Food CFO, is the first place that Emily is sharing some news on new growth and expansion for Boichik, which is really fun.
So, Sarah, you gave us a really great list there of why we consider Emily a BABOYOT, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've been talking about this a lot lately, leaning into that acronym, BABOYOT, building a business on your own terms, right? But I think that it never hurts to restate and kind of reaffirm what is a BABOYOT for our listeners out there, because I know there's a bunch of them out there in the audience right now, and they may not even know it.
I think that's a great idea, Chelsea. We define here at the Good Food CFO BABOYOTs as good food founders who are defying industry norms. And what we mean by that is that they're redefining success for themselves, for their business, for their place in the food industry. They're building their businesses on their own terms. And truly, they're changing the way that food business is done. And, when I speak to founders and they're in the day-to-day, much like myself, right? And I don't think you have to be a food founder to be striving to be a BABOYOT. I consider myself a BABOYOT as well. It can be hard to remember that in our daily actions, we're redefining what success looks like, for ourselves and within the industry that we're in. It can be hard to remember that we're building our business on our own terms. And as we often say at the Good Food CFO, we're running our own race, right? We're not comparing ourselves to others. We are being true to ourselves, true to our vision and our mission, and striving to do that every day. And that we're changing the way that food business is done with every action that we take. And the food founders that I'm talking to now are doing that too. And sometimes it can be hard to recognize that or to realize that and to remember that, like, hey, hold on a second. You all are part of the good food revolution just by the daily actions that you are taking. And so we
Yeah.
want you to remember that.
Yeah, I think sometimes, like, right, it's hard to zoom out, like you said, right, and
Yep.
see the bigger. And I think that's a big reason why we do these Baba Yacht episodes, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're here to serve as a reminder that it's the little everyday decisions and the way that you move through your business that makes you a Baba Yacht.
And I want to add to that too, Chelsea. It's something that you and I have been talking about behind the scenes as we strategize episodes and talk about, changes to our website and new tools and resources that we want to make available. It's not about mimicking the success of someone else. It's not about following one specific way or process or formula to building your business. We've started to talk about it as a means of critical thinking,
Yeah.
independent thinking, right? To make decisions that are right for you and your business. And so I hope that these Babayot episodes show the breadth of ways that you can approach business, the various, ways that you can create a vision that is all your own. So the intention is for each founder to have a different story, for each founder to have a different approach and a different outlook, and to represent that independent sort of like critical thinking that can really make you stand out and successful as a founder.
And, another thing that I think is really important to point out as a Baba Yacht, and that I think Emily highlights really well in this conversation, is that you can also change your mind,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
right? You can also get to point B or C or D in your business and go, oh, this no longer works for me. Or,
Yeah.
oh, this, needs an adjustment, right?
Yeah.
To be able to get to where I'm going now,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, I just think that this conversation is super valuable.
Yeah. And again, like we recorded for a long time, as it often happens. Not everything that I talk with a founder or any guest can make it into the primary episode. And so there's often bonus content for our Baba Yacht members to listen to. And so I don't know where this part of the conversation falls with Emily, if it's going to be in the main episode or if it's in the bonus content, but we talk about expectations, unrealistic expectations that we often have as founders for everything to work out perfectly, right? Or as
Mhm.
we think it will in our heads. And how do we recognize and reconcile with the fact that, like, not everything is going to be a home run? And I think that that's a really important, part of this as well. It's hard when things don't go the way you want, but it doesn't mean quit, but it might mean change your approach. It
Yeah.
might mean change your mind. And I think that you're right that that's like a super valuable lesson for people to take away from this combo.
Yeah. Well, okay. Before we get into this conversation, though, Sarah,
Yeah.
we are recording this new segment just after the 1 year anniversary of the FDA and the USDA giving clearance to a couple of companies, Upside Foods and Good Meat, which is a division of Eat Just,
Mm-hmm.
to sell their cultivated meat products in the US. And that reminded me of an article from the New York Times that came out back in February that we read, that I actually saw shared on LinkedIn. And I thought that this might be the perfect opportunity to not only discuss that article
Mm-hmm.
and look at how these businesses have fared over the last year, but as always, get some of your insights into what we can take away from stories like this.
Okay. All right. I think I might have some things to say about cultured meat. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, Sarah, I want you to imagine a future where meat is grown in advanced sterile facilities, where
Okay.
no animals are harmed, and there's minimal environmental impact.
Okay.
Okay. This is the vision that captivated investors who poured nearly $3 billion into startups like Eat Just and Upside Foods that I mentioned before.
Mm-hmm.
There was backing from heavyweights like SoftBank, major meat packers like Tyson, Cargill, and JBS. And they even had celebrity endorsements from people like Leonardo DiCaprio. However, a February New York Times investigation by Joe Fassler titled The Revolution That Died on Its Way to Dinner reveals an industry struggling with, quote, squandered resources, broken promises, and unproven science.
This is really interesting for a number of reasons. I think, Chelsea, you and I have talked here on the podcast before about what I'll call investment in food technology. And I've shared my opinions on how I have a hope or a wish that such investment would be given to food infrastructure, particularly regenerative farming,
Mm-hmm.
sustainable farming. I personally work with farmers, ranchers, fishers who, gosh, if they had a fraction of that $3 billion that was invested into the cultivated meat industry, the things that they could do, not just to produce protein and meat for people, but to do it in a way that regenerates the land, does things like improve or take steps toward reversing some of the global warming that is happening, really heal the land, bring back the bugs and the birds and certain animals that we're losing due to conventional farming, right? And other things going on in our food industry. And so just off the bat, it just sort of, to be really transparent, it's frustrating to me to see this much money going into an industry that had no real proof of concept. And I think that's why it's so difficult for me. And as I was reading the article when you shared it with me, as we're prepping for the conversation, I pulled out a section and I want to read it here. It says, Steve Molino, who's a principal at Clear Current Capital, an early stage venture food focused on sustainable food and an early backer of Blue Nalu, which was cell-grown bluefin tuna. He's no stranger to the practice of, quote, placing big bets with limited information. But even so, he was amazed to see the way that money poured into the industry. He says there was no real numbers to pull from that allowed anyone to say, wait a second, this is either going to not work, or if it does, it's going to take a really long time. So without that data, he said someone could give you a tiny sample of something and you're like, holy crap, this is the future. So all of this money poured in to sort of restate what he said with no real information or way to validate how much time, effort, and money it would truly take to produce a viable product. And so, not to skip to the end here, but, like as you said, squandered resources, right? At the end of the day, the industry is not moving forward in the way that people thought it was going to. And now the funding is drying up for the companies that are still in existence. And I know that we'll kind of dig into that, a little bit further, but I continue to be frustrated by these stories of such immense capital investment in unproven areas.
Yeah, and I think that you so eloquently boiled it down in the difference between regenerative farming, regenerative agriculture, and this cultivated, meat, or we could even just say cultivated food industry. I don't even know what we want to call it, right? But it is that proof of concept, and it kind of blows my mind that any investor wants to put money where they don't see the proof of concept.
Yeah. I think one thing I'll say, and we talked about this in a prior news segment, is that we are seeing investment funds and general business like investments and ventures into the regenerative space. And that is a change that I am happy to be seeing. And I think it's, as we discussed, on the heels of sort of disappointment in the outcomes of investments made in certain food technologies. I think the other thing that you bring up here, Chelsea, is the who did the investing. Yes, we had, capital, investment funds and kind of big banks, but we also had big meat. You pointed out Tyson, Cargill, and JBS. And to me, what this screams is continued consolidation in the food industry. So we already know that these companies have have a great control over the supply chain. They have
Mm-hmm.
great control over how much farms and farm workers get paid, right? There's a lot of ethical problems within these corporations, on many levels. And they saw this as a potential direction for where the meat industry would go in the future. And so their investment in this industry was a means of maintaining a certain level of control and consolidation. And in my mind, if this did work out, or if someday in the future this works out, I absolutely could see, big meat buying up these, quote unquote smaller companies and, folding them in, you
Yeah,
know.
that's exactly where my mind was going, because not only not only buying up these companies, but if you think about who are the players out there that have the resources to create, as we're going to talk about in a moment, right? These almost like mega facilities,
Mhm.
right? If this were to be the future of food, yeah, it's going to be those big three, right?
Yeah, and I think, if we step back a second, like, outside of this article, and we just think about consolidation of the food industry in general, right? And I don't know if I've ever said this explicitly. Perhaps I have said it, here on the podcast. But one of the reasons that I am such a strong proponent of, champion of building regional and local businesses is in support of consolidation, right, of the food industry. And it's not something that's going to change overnight. It's not something that changed overnight from, small downtowns with, independently owned businesses in it to, Walmarts in, every city. That didn't happen overnight, and it's not going to undo itself, period. And we're not going to undo it, overnight. But I think that as we think about being a BABOYOTs and think about how do we want to build our businesses, and what do we want for ourselves, for our teams, for our communities from that, I hope that we start to see the return of more and more regional businesses to fight these conglomerates, really. And I see it day to day in my work with the farmers and ranchers and founders that I work with. So I feel like it's promising, and I want to echo that here as well.
I think that's great. And to round this story out, right? And to put a bow on it, what we are seeing is that, as you kind of already mentioned, since 2022, the explosive investment in cultivated meat has begun to dry up altogether.
Yeah.
The article cites unrealistic timelines, scaling issues, and unsustainable costs as the major culprits. Companies have consistently overpromised and underdelivered. The CEO of Upside Foods claimed in 2016 that in just a few years, we expect to be selling protein packed pork, beef, and chicken. Now, that was in 2016,
Yeah.
right? But 8 years later, there are no products available in stores. And then you have Upside Foods, who've been producing chicken cutlets almost by hand in like teeny tiny quantities, using disposable plastic bottles, and basically having a process that is definitely unscalable and unsustainable. And then Dave Humbird, who is a biotech expert, published a peer-reviewed analysis concluding that production costs would likely preclude the affordability of these products as food.
Yeah. I think, something that's striking me here, Chelsea, is that I love innovation. I love people believing that they can create something new and different. I love that mentality and that way of thinking. But to take a lot of money on a promise and not follow through, I think the expectation would be that the funding would
Mm-hmm.
dry up, right? And you know, I think in the article it talks about how in 2022, May actually of 2022, Good Meat announced their plans to build two factories, one in Singapore and one in the United States. So two locations that had, the approval to sell the cultivated meat. And they were going to be mega facilities housing up to 10 250,000 liter bioreactors so that they could produce millions of pounds of meat. So they were really taking big, expensive next steps to build infrastructure without proof of concept, without viability, you know? And I think that that's really interesting. If we were going to take that and turn it into a lesson learned for a founder, it might be like, don't get too far ahead of yourself. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Really know what you're capable of. I mean, that facility, according to, you know, the article at the time that it was printed, is not built. There's some legal battles going on between Good Meat and the construction company that was intended to build it. When the author of the article visited Eat Just in January of 2024, the company was in the process of downsizing from 2 buildings into 1. And earlier in 2023, they had laid off 80 employees. So there was a lot of downsizing happening. And reportedly, one of their, you know, large investors had pulled the funding and was turning to real estate investment instead, something that had a bit more predictable, I would
Yeah.
think, you know, return on investment. So, you know, I think there's a lot we can learn from any any article about investment, any article about, you know, a food venture that didn't work out. I just hope that soon, Chelsea, you and I are reading and sharing more news articles about investment in food infrastructure that has to do with, you know, good farming practices and
Yeah.
sustainability and things
Is
of
in
that nature.
harmony with, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
with our planet,
Exactly.
because we want it to be here for a long, long time.
Yep. Yep.
Well, not sure if I mentioned this already, but I'll go ahead and say we definitely will link to this article in the show notes so that you can read the whole thing. I mean, we just scratched the surface with this
Yeah.
one. It is a very long and very informative piece.
Yeah. All right, Chelsea, something else you and I care about, BABOYOTs and bagels. So I think without further ado, we should get to the episode.
All right, let's do it. BABOYOTs are food founders who are defying industry norms. They're redefining what success looks like, building businesses on their own terms, and changing the way food business is done. We know that within the current business media landscape, it can be hard to stay committed to those goals. That's one of the reasons we created this podcast and our BABOYOT membership. As a BABOYOT member, the Good Food CFO will support you with access to exclusive member benefits like live coaching sessions and networking events, your brand highlighted right here on the podcast, beta testing of new tools before they launch, and annual members also receive discounts on all tools and services, like our CFO office hours. Invest in your future, support our mission, and be part of the movement advocating for a more equitable and vibrant food system. Visit thegoodfoodcfo.com/join and become a BABOYOT member today. And now back to the show.
Emily, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be back.
So first, I want to say thank you for, well, yes, being here again, but also, I don't know if we connected after the first time you were here. People really loved your episode, and it was really inspiring in a number of different ways for a
Good.
number of different people. So I know I'm not the only one who's excited to have you back for that very reason. If my math is correct, let me pull up my notes here. We recorded your last episode in the fall of 2022. And I'm going to do like a little recap of where you were in case you don't remember. And in case maybe our listeners don't quite remember. You had one location in Berkeley.
Yeah.
So you had one location in Berkeley. I think you might have been doing a little bit of like wholesale. I know that I was able to get your bagels delivered to LA via like a special service I had never used before, but was amazing. You had plans for your factory. You had plans for a second location, which was going to be, I believe, in Palo Alto. And you were about to embark on SMBX funding, which you broke a record for the amount of money raised, which was amazing. And at the time, I also want to quote this. I'm fangirling a little bit here. You'll get to talk in a little bit, I promise.
That's fine.
You had a vision. What you said on the podcast was to build a bagel empire, that you made the bagel for you, but the fun is in taking over the world. And it very much seems like you have been busy taking over the world.
Yep, we are. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah. So what I think is really interesting, and I know that you're a big supporter of the podcast. You are a BABOYOT member, and we want to thank you for that level of support that you give us. And while I know that you do that, you might not be able to listen to every episode. We did a case study essentially on Foxtrot not long ago, and the deal with that business, kind of when we went through the information, was like they grew really, really fast, and they seem to have done it with like a lot of capital, but it seemed to be that they weren't really making the best decisions on when to grow and how to grow. And I'm actually quite excited to have this conversation with you after having done that episode, because, and I'm going to kind of quote you again, in our last conversation, you shared that you had a business plan that had lots of like financial scenarios in it. What I really want to key in on is the bad, okay, good, and great times to grow, and that you had given yourself some markers for knowing when it was a good time to grow. So I'm curious, you've since opened 5 locations, done a second raise with SMBX. You've got 2 more locations coming in San Francisco, and I believe that there's a location coming to my neck of the woods in Los Angeles.
Yes, there is.
I'm so excited. So I want to know, like right off the bat, are you still using those markers? Did you use those markers to make your growth decisions? Do you still use them? Have they changed at all?
So I haven't, when the last I spoke to you and we had made the decision, I was building the factory and we were building Palo Alto. There haven't been any like super big decision points since then, other than do we go to LA now or do we wait longer? But in terms of building all these stores all over the Bay Area, so that had been set in motion by building the factory. In fact, if I didn't do that, it would be really dumb at this point, because I've spent $5 million building this 18,000 square foot factory, intending to make all these bagels. And I need the stores to make the factory really worthwhile.
Yeah.
The big change that I've made in the plan, actually, since we spoke last, was what we are now calling our outpost stores. Okay. And this was a decision that we didn't make lightly. I had initially said all the stores will receive raw dough and will boil and bake on site. Actually, in our shopping for real estate, we came across this space in Larkspur, which is in Marin County. And it was this super adorable space directly adjacent to an Equator Coffee in a redwood grove, like in downtown historic Lark. It was so gorgeous that I was like, I want this, but it was very small and there was no way we could put an oven in it. And looking, I'm like, no, it's so cute. Rob and I, kind of went back and forth, and it's like, well, what if we just dropped the bagels off in the morning and sold them, but the bagels were already finished in the factory? What would that mean? Would it be okay? How fresh would it be? Would we take a hit in quality? What would happen with that? Gave that a lot of thought and decided, you know what? We've done some events. We did this Jewish Pride night at the A's game last year. And we did this huge thing. We brought about 1,000 bagels, and we're giving all these bagels out and toasting them and cream cheesing them. And people went nuts for it. And not one person complained that they weren't baked, within the last 3 hours. And those had all come from the plant, been baked many hours before, that day. Yeah. But it was like an evening event, and we baked them, I don't know, around noon or so. And thinking about that, we said, well, no one complained that they weren't hot out of the oven. The space is so cute. You know what? Let's try this and see how it works. I've constantly been bombarded with requests for cloud kitchens asking me to move into their cloud kitchen. And I've said, no, what the heck do I want a cloud kitchen for? The important thing is I'm making the bagels. And they're like, no, you just bring the bagels over every morning and we sell them. And that doesn't appeal to me. I want, then there's no soul with the brand. If we say, oh, we have a shop, but it's not really a shop, it's just a cloud kitchen and they're just throwing cream cheese on a bagel. I didn't like that idea at all, but it made me think, if there's people who are doing that. Maybe we kind of look at this outpost. It's kind of functioning as our own cloud kitchen in a way, where we're expanding our footprint. So we thought we'd give it a try. So we took this lease, and it let us build a spot for vastly less money than a store where we'd have to put in this $40,000 oven and a $20,000 kettle, much less the venting, the hood, the all of this construction, the plumbing, the floor sink, all kinds of stuff, plus the larger space. So we got a smaller footprint, so it's cheaper rent, way cheaper equipment, way cheaper construction, way faster. All we need is the basic like a 3-compartment sink and a prep sink, all the basic food service things. Everything was so much easier and so much cheaper and so much faster. So it was like a dream compared to building Palo Alto. I think we signed the lease, and I think it was about 3 months later we were opening.
Right.
This felt like a miracle compared to everything else I've done. And it was a big hit, and people totally dug it. And it was nice to have a North Bay presence, and it's just so beautiful over there. Because that went well, we're like, well, this is a good experiment. We've got a good result. Let's think about San Francisco, especially because we want to be all over the Bay, have a dozen-ish stores scattered around the Bay. So clearly we need to be in San Francisco, and that had been in the plans from the beginning. My original plan was, okay, we'll put one shop in San Francisco somewhere with the oven and the kettle and the whole thing. I'm like, gosh, it's tough because moving around in San Francisco is a pain in the butt. You can't just like drive and park easily. So it felt like a lot of pressure. If I'm only going to put one in, where is it going to go? And plus there's been all these horror stories the last few years of people dealing with the permit department and the building department in San Francisco.
Okay.
And ice cream shops waiting like 2 years and not being allowed to open, and all kinds of crazy, terrible things. So I was really not looking forward to doing the full construction setup there. So because this worked, because we only need very basic food service equipment, we can take something that's an existing food business and basically do a pretty straightforward renovation and get going. So with that in mind, we started shopping for spaces in the city, and then we found one we really liked. The landlord wasn't talking to us. We were looking all over, found another one we liked. I was like, okay, these are going to be the two. Then the first one that we really liked and that actually Rob had totally fallen in love with, the landlord finally came around and was like, oh, okay, you can have it. It's like, well, okay, let's have 3. Why not? Because I'm like, it's like 3 for the price of 1.
Right.
So we're like, okay, let's just take all 3 and go. And so that's what we're doing. So they're all outposts. And then the plan is when they're all done, we load the truck up from the factory with bagels, and we drive and we go drop over the bridge to Marin, drop there, come back around. And furthermore, when all the 4 stores are cranking and it's a busy weekend, we could even then fill up the truck again and do another loop around so that we're getting even more volume of bagels. The ovens have another chance to crank out a few more thousand bagels, fill the truck back up and send it out again. So that's been the big change in plan since then. But otherwise, that same let's take over the world has been the business plan, and that's been moving along. It's been something that's funny because it's like, oh, that feels like an eternity ago. And so much has happened, but it feels like it's been moving very slowly.
It's a year and a half.
I know, but so the wholesale's been growing, but not as fast. We're in a lot of doors, but a lot of them, the volume is not very high. And that's kind of our project now is how do we get that volume up? And we got into Erewhon. So we started working with distributors. We have 2 distributors in NorCal and 1 in SoCal. And that's been interesting. And we have to pay to ship pallets of frozen bagels down to that distributor. So that's an extra expense. And we got into Erewhon, which I was very excited about. And then, of course, they're like, yeah, you can pay us thousands of dollars to get in. I'm like, okay, fine. And the sales are not going very well. We're doing demos, and when we do demos, we get a nice bump, and then it kind of comes back down to very slow. And I'm like, the last thing I want to do is drop out of Erewhon. But how do we? Because we just don't have the reputation
Right.
down there yet. So same when we're in Bristol Farms. Also, so how do we get that volume up, especially where we don't have the reputation? But even here, we've been getting spread further and further, which is really cool. But it's taking a while. The results are much slower than I had in the beginning when I first started, early on, where it's like, look, we're in Berkeley Bowl, and everyone was like, woohoo, and we're all going to go buy them in Berkeley Bowl. And the volume there still is tremendous. It's huge. It's funny. It's the opposite of what I expected, that the closer people are to our original location, the more volume we do in supermarkets, because those people know us. And I still get people saying all the time, oh, the line is too long, I don't want to go. I'll just buy them in the supermarket. Further away in the Bay Area, the sales don't have that same volume. We do have like a small demo team going out now, but I'm listening to a recent podcast episode, and I was thinking, maybe we need to do a like 25% off sort of thing, or we need to get people, we need to drive trial somehow, because if I can get them to eat it, get them to take it home and put it in their freezer and then toast it, that would be better than just the few people who happen to be coming by in that small window that we're offering tastings. And so that's a big challenge, but it's nice when we open the new store, we get a lot of hubbub, and the store itself drives a lot of business, and the retail stores still do account for the vast majority of our business. We have 6 of them now, but wholesale is about a sixth of the total of the retail.
When we talked last time on the podcast, you had said, like, we're saying no to some wholesale, like some retail and distribution for sure. That was a no for you at the time. And I believe you very much felt like it'll still be available when we're ready and we're at, when the factory probably was up and running and you have the capacity to be able to do it. So did you always know, when that point would be that you'd be like, okay, let's open distribution? Or did that sort of come just with time?
It was really once we got the factory going, it felt like, well, now we should do that, because we want them to go further afield, and we don't want to be in the truck driving business as much as possible. We already have a lot of truck driving happening, where we're delivering our dough and our bagels to our own stores, and we're doing some of the distribution still. But certainly I want to get the bagels going up to Sacramento, going up to Humboldt, down to Monterey, all these places. I want them to go far afield. And I definitely don't want my drivers having to take them there, because we have better things to do than sending a truck with a couple cases up to Sacramento.
Yeah. Let the drivers who, like, that's their job, do that. That's their business.
Yeah. So it was very unpleasant to lose all of that margin, though. I'll say that was a nasty hit to the bottom line in a big way, or the top line rather. And so we're still recovering from that, having that much smaller margin. We still have a good 50% margin, and plus, like a minimum 50% margin.
Great.
It's definitely a big hit from when we were taking the full $2 a bagel, and now the stores are saying, well, we want a promo deal, we want this, we want a free, all these things that before we weren't doing any of it. It's just, do you want a bagel? It's $2.
Yeah.
If it's retail, it's $3, wholesale, it's $2. That's it. There's no more discussion. And now everyone wants to wheel and deal, and I don't love that, but it seems like I have to play that game to some extent to get the bagels going.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's almost like the more volume you are able to drive automatically when you hit a store, right? They require a lot less of that of you, because they're wanting to move your product as well, right? So they're thinking the same thing that you mentioned a couple minutes ago. It's like, we need to drive trial, so maybe we need to run a promo and get people to, to try this who otherwise wouldn't, on a day when we're not there doing a demo. It doesn't always last forever, right? That you've got to be running these promos forever. But I think what's interesting, just thinking like out loud strategy, is like, are you doing the LA location as like a strategy to build the brand in the area to then drive those in-store sales?
Well, yes, in at least some way. I definitely, the retail helps drive the wholesale, and vice versa to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
They both really complement each other. But building the store in LA, getting buzz in LA, is going to drive people to pick up this product out of their supermarket and be, oh, I heard about these guys, but I don't want to drive over there. Or I heard there's a long line, but oh, look, it's in the freezer. I could just get it. This is great.
Yeah.
So yes, I expect that when we get open in LA, that will naturally start to really improve those sales. But I still want them to do well. I like it's just because such a letdown from all the, I just keep getting home runs. And so to only hit a few singles lately is just like, oh, like that's really disappointing. But it's part of the process. Not all of it is a home run.
Yeah.
The other thing we're doing, we actually are very excited about, we just are starting to roll out custom freezers. I don't know if you saw that on Instagram.
We did. Yeah. They're adorable. First of all, I mean, your branding and logo and the bagels are so cute. So yeah, tell us about that.
I've mentioned that to a number of stores for a while, because Berkeley Bowl did that right off the bat, because the buyer who approached me ran the bakery and deli. And so he wanted the bagels in his section of the store. So he got a freezer to put in the bakery to put my bagels in it, because he didn't want to hand me over to the frozen section. Yeah. And they've been flying. And then they let me put, stickers on and stuff. And it looks really cool. Even though they'll put some gluten-free bread in there, it always looked really impressive. So I've mentioned to a number of stores that we were selling to, listen, we would be happy to put in a standalone freezer if you want to try it. And everyone was like, no, we don't have any room. We have, all sorts of excuses. And then recently, one of the distributors we're with, we've told their sales guys, and one of their sales guys is particularly great, and he started talking some customers into it. So we got that, and this was just pure luck. We had like the big cheese of Safeway just happened to saunter into the factory one day a few months ago with another big cheese. And then they just asked us if I happened to be in, and I did. And me and my head of sales were like, what? Oh my God. So we wound up having this impromptu meeting with the bigwigs and hit it off, and everything was great. And we said, listen, here's what we're doing. And by the way, we have these custom freezers. I don't know if you'd be interested in that. And he said, oh yeah, let's do that. So we had a meeting with them. And at this meeting, one of their people said, okay, we're going to start with 2 custom freezers and put them in Andronico's and a high-end Safeway. As I said, I don't want to be in all the regular Safeway. So, but they're like, well, we have like 3 levels of Safeway. And then the Andronico's brand is kind of at that top tier also. They said, but we want your face on it. I'm like, oh no, that just sounds terrible. So I had to come up with a thing, and I made it a cling so it's not so permanent and it's small. But everyone loves it except for me. It makes me twitch. But everyone else thinks it's adorable.
When will you be posting that photo to Instagram?
That's on there. You have to zoom in. It's a little cling on the front of the freezer, like an eyeball.
Chelsea, if you're listening, and you find it, can you zoom it in on the YouTube? That would be amazing right now. Just have it fly in.
And there's a QR code that takes you to the About Us section of the website. So you can kind of read the story. So if you're shopping, what is this? But now it has all this presence. So there's a few things that it's doing. Or we have this impressive big freezer with a lit up panel and all this branding, and it's full of rows of our bagels. But I think just as importantly, every store other than Berkeley Bowl, we've just been in the freezer section somewhere, and always in like the frozen miscellaneous section, because there's not a category for frozen bagels. So, maybe moved in with the gluten-free bread that happens to be in the freezer, and often like the pie crust that move only at Thanksgiving and are just kind of collecting ice the rest of the year. So people aren't looking for our bagels in the freezer, even though they know they're frozen. So there's something about shopper behavior. And if you're not like just perusing the freezer section, you're just not even seeing anything that's there.
You bring up something that so many of our listeners deal with is like, they want to bring you in store, you get distribution, you're in the store, and then where you land on shelf is like not ideal. And it's not catching, people's eyes. I remember when I went to Erewhon to get bagels the first time, when you launched in Erewhon in LA, I was like looking around and I'm like, where are they? Where are they? There's this wall of freezers. So my assumption is, okay, I'm walking from the opening, like the doors, back to the freezer section. It's got to be in here somewhere. Where are they? I turned around. There was one single, maybe double freezer at the end of an aisle to the, you know what I mean, on the opposite side. And that's where they were, like maybe third or fourth shelf from the bottom. And I said to Nate, my husband's name is Nate. I said, these should be higher. So I like the creativity. I mean, not every brand is going to be able to get a freezer or something, right? But it's like, what can you do for your brand to help drive awareness, right? Because we're saying drive trial, but drive awareness is a really big thing. It seems
they don't even see it. They're not even going to consider it. But that's the problem, is that they're generally looking in the bakery or the bread aisle.
Yeah.
And picking out whichever bagel, and they're not, once they're in the freezer section, they're not thinking about bagels.
Yeah.
Unless they're looking for gluten-free.
Yeah.
We've had a number of different clings that we've made and to try to allow stores to put these on the freezer, on the outside of the freezer door, to bring more attention to it. But a lot of stores don't want that because they want everything to be clean and they don't want all your branded clutter all over the place. That's tough to overcome.
Yeah. I mean, you've really entered a whole new business in a sense, right? In terms of like how it works and what the margins are and what you have to do to get people to think about you in store, you know what I mean? And it's a really interesting thing to hear your insights. And I'm sorry that it wasn't an immediate home run for you, but like you said, they can't all be home runs.
I wouldn't. Well, they could. they could all, but it's a good exercise for me to have to deal with things that are not home runs. It's an interesting challenge, and how do we figure this out? So I'm excited to start seeing. We just got the first 3 freezers located. We've got another 4 that are going to go out next week, and to start watching that sales data and see how that volume is.
So you bring up sales data. One of the things you said also during our last episode together is that like business is a math problem, essentially. Like it's all about math. I think a lot of founders that I talk to, they're sort of like, I know I'm supposed to pay attention to the numbers, but I'm not a numbers person, or, variety of other things they say. I would love to hear from you. How often are you looking at the data? How important is that to your sort of day to day and your, decision making?
So one of the things that changed when we got the factory open, and as we've been doing all this construction in more stores, and then now there's just a lot more going on all the time. Also, a lot of our margins have been dropping in some ways. There's a number of things. We're like, our overall margins are smaller than they were actually 2 years ago, when I had the one tiny store that was cranking 24/7, bursting at the seams, and we had these fantastic margins on everything, and we were doing all direct delivery. So our margins have come down also because we're supporting this big factory that's not running at anywhere near capacity. And all this construction we just keep doing, pouring the money, we're just pouring out faster than it's coming in. So I've been forced into really paying attention to cash flow, where I didn't need to do that the first few years, because it was like, oh, the money is just pouring in with like a fire hose. This is great. So that's become a big thing. So our books are on QuickBooks Online, and I found their cash flow planner, and I use that. And I basically go check the books every day. So I update, make sure the bank accounts all update, and I check that planner because we also switched from cash basis to accrual. I had originally been doing all this sort of modeling in Excel, and when we switched to accrual and had so many things going on, it just never matched up very well at all anymore. So that's my tool of choice, but I am looking at that several times a week because I want to keep an eye on the cash situation because that's now key because so many things we're spending so much money, we're selling to distributors, we have all these accounts that are 30-day net. There's just a lot going on, and that has become a big thing for me to think about. Plus I'm checking the reports and all of those, and I can check the invoices and see who's overdue and maybe send a great email. But it is math. It is math, and I know I said this before, but it's calculus and it's flow. Calculus is all about rate of change and the rate of change of the rate of change, and it's like flow, and the money is like it's water. So if you have like the fire hose, if the water is pouring into the bucket, and then there's also water coming out of the bucket, and how much water is left in the bucket, and is it rising or is it falling? And that's what money is doing in your business.
Yeah. Someone said to me, I said something about cash flow the other day during a presentation, and someone said, that sounds very sophisticated. I don't know if we have cash flow. And I said, if you are in business, if you're making money and you're spending money, that is cash flow. And that no business is without that. And I mean, we shifted strategy and even how we talk here quite a bit. It's like, yes, profitability is important, but especially if you're on accrual, focusing on that cash flow, focusing on are people paying on time? What are we spending? And when is that cash going to come in? You can't really look at your P&L and go, oh, that's how much cash I have, or that's how much cash we got this month. Right. And so especially when you're on that kind of accounting, that cash flow is massive. And I do a lot of looking at that for my clients. I actually love looking at cash flow, right? It's like, everything is a challenge to me. And I have a feeling like you sort of feel the same way. You're like, okay, if the cash is flowing in this direction, I'm going to do the things and get it to turn around and start heading. I'm going to get the number of weeks or months that my cash is expected to last to grow longer and longer and longer. And I think that's an important part of business, is someone on your team having an eye on that, right? And knowing what levers to pull to change it.
Yeah. And can we pull the trigger on another location right now? And if that's going to be, I'm going to have to spend $200,000 in 3 months. Is that what does that do to the planned cash flow? And maybe we can't do it, or maybe we can, or maybe I'll just have to hit up our line of credit to pay for it, and it'll all work out later. And, just kind of dunking my head in the water of, additional leverage yet again. But that's the game I'm playing. But it is, cash flow is like, water, or you could even think of it as like the gold coins that Scrooge McDuck is swimming in, but they're pouring, they're literally flowing in and they're flowing out. And that's the whole game.
Yeah.
You want your score to go up.
Your score. Exactly. Yes. So I want to talk about, you mentioned his name a couple of times, Rob. He's your chief operating officer. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And he's been with you for a while, because I feel like you mentioned him when we first met.
Yeah. It's been over 2 years. I think closer to 2.5-ish years.
Yeah.
It's another really lucky find, and made a world of difference in what I'm doing. His background is restaurant operations, and his whole adult life he's been doing restaurant operations, and he's done high-end restaurants, and he's done Cheesecake Factory and the trainings. And so he's this awesome people person. He loves people. He loves people the way I love math.
I love it. So
and
great.
people tell me, they're like, well, you have people skills. I'm like, not really. I don't know. They're okay. They're passable, but I'm not winning any awards with my people skills. And I did not like being in charge of HR. And it was a miracle that things went as okay as they did when HR problems arose, and it was, I was in charge. I was so excited to have someone be like, that was the first thing I want to delegate. here's HR. Boom. It's now.
You take this.
And he's so amazing with it. And I've sat in, we've had some very difficult employee meetings and people needing to be fired. And I would, just kind of sit in the room and let him do all the talking. And I would just be like, wow, he's handling this so differently than how I would. And I'm just in awe around how well it would work and his whole approach to it. And even with training and developing people, and he just has this real knack he just loves kind of building the team, putting training in place. He's huge on communication. That's his mantra, is always communicating with everyone and making stuff go every day. And that's his jam. And he loves that. It's such a fantastic compliment to what I'm doing. And I was able to attract him because we had this interview and I said, I want to build this global bagel empire. And he thought, wow, that sounds really cool. I want to come join and build the global bagel empire. So my vision attracted him to help. And now he executes my vision, and it's taking more and more, a whole lot of things off of my plate. He kind of tries to push me to delegate more and more things. It's been a challenge for me, but I've been slowly getting better at delegating more and more things. It's great to delegate the things that I don't want to do at all.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder to delegate the things that I like. So there's still a lot that I do hold on to myself, but slowly you're like letting people do occasional bits of things, or just making plans and letting people just, okay, this is going to be yours. And without him, I wouldn't be able to be running. We wouldn't be growing remotely as fast if I didn't find him or someone, a comparable operations person. Running this level of people and all of these things, I don't think I could handle it. It would not be good for me.
Yeah. It's good to know that. It's good to know, to have awareness of that. And you were recently awarded the Most Admired CEO award by the San Francisco Business Times. So congratulations. I haven't said that to you yet. Yeah. You thanked Rob in your acceptance speech. And you also talked about how your title changed from owner to CEO. And I'm curious, based on what you were, just saying about how your role is changing and what he's taking over, was that just a mental shift for you, or both a mental and like a physical kind of day-to-day shift as well?
It's both. It started, when I took him on, and then we would, have meetings with whoever else, and he would kind of say, this is our CEO, Emily. It's like, okay, I guess I am. And then it has been this mentally growing into that, because it's also, as we were putting in more stores and more stuff is happening, and it happens faster and faster, and there's more and more of a team making things happen, which is incredible and scary. And I become a little, less and less hands-on with every piece of incremental growth. Yeah, at some point I just started, kind of change my email signature to that. and just kind of started this transition to, I guess I'm the CEO now, and because we have multiple stores and there's all this stuff happening. Why not? It seems like it's appropriate. And it's been good, because it kind of puts me in that mindset where I'm supposed to be, Rob likes to say, I'm steering the ship. And that's my job, where I tend to love to be like, let me go and get my hands dirty. And I'm still also the head mechanic when things break, and the chief technology officer, and the chief marketing officer, and in charge of the graphics, a lot of things.
Bringing it back to sort of CEO and Rob and the number of locations that you have, when I checked, and this number might not be correct anymore, but you have something like over 140 employees.
We have about that right now.
Wow. You mentioned you're not really a people person. HR is not your strong suit. So I think it's really smart, to have Rob step into a role where he does thrive. One of the things we talk about a lot here is the value that small businesses, and yours is growing and it is going to be an empire, but still you are a local business in some ways. And I wonder if you think about the effect that your growing bagel empire is having on the local economy of Northern California.
Oh, I haven't thought I feel way too small for that. I don't know. I suppose it's certainly doing something. I don't know. That feel I don't feel like I'm like really making, there's so much happening in the Bay Area, and it's mostly like tech and biotech, and AI is now the big
Yeah.
industry in town. So I feel so, insignificant next to
Mm.
all of those. But people love it. The nice thing is that people love it and they thank me, and they're so excited, especially with the new store. Like we opened the first one in San Francisco in Presidio Heights, and people were I was hanging out there for the first few days and just people thanking me. Thank you, thank you, thank you for opening here. And this neighborhood feels so much, you've just improved our neighborhood
Yeah.
because this is so lively. And on the weekend, there's just this whole crowd milling around outside, and everyone's got their dog and their strollers and all the kids in pajamas. And it's just we just bring this really fun weekend vibe with us wherever we open up. And it's really nice and it's rewarding that way. So we've definitely been making, having a serious effect on the communities that we've opened in.
Yeah. And you employ 140 people.
And there is
I
that.
mean,
Yeah.
that's an economic impact, I think, And yeah, I'm just recalling like when I think you had said your dad used to bring you back bagels, your favorite bagel.
Yeah.
And that's like a memory that lived with you, still lives with you, right? And you're helping to create a similar memory for people, children and their families, and that's coming to get your bagels or, picking them up from the store.
Absolutely.
That's so cool.
Yeah. No, it feels good in so many ways.
Yeah.
And for my employees, and I'm happy and I'm proud to say that we provide a good working environment. We pay well. Everyone at the shops pool all the tips for everyone, no matter what job they're
Nice.
working in. It all pools together every payroll, and they wound up making quite a bit extra money through tips. We have health insurance. We have a 401k with matching for everyone who's here full time, I think after 6 months.
Nice.
So we can, we have nice things, and then we have pretty low turnover for a food business. And I want it to be nice. I'm not trying, we're not trying to make people suffer here. And
Yeah.
so it works out pretty well.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait until the LA location opens. My fingers are crossed that it's not too far away from my house, but I'll
Where do you
make a
live?
drive. I live in Sherman Oaks,
I don't know where
the
Sherman.
Valley. We'll just call it the Valley.
Okay. So we won't be in the valley yet, but we're going to
Okay.
be in Los Feliz.
Oh, well, that's a great place for you to be. That's a
Right.
great place for you to be. Yeah. That's awesome. That's not too far.
And we're actually going to have a second and the first outpost to go with it. So that's going to be we're kind of starting over. That'll be a 3,000 square foot, like a large retail store.
Cool.
So we'll start over with the small dough equipment. And we're going to have our first outpost. This is what actually pushed things to move along, because the realtor said there's a space in the Bradbury building. And I was like, I'm such an
Ooh.
architecture buff. And I was like, oh, really? And so that space, it was a Subway for years, but it's under new ownership. And they're like, we want classy stuff in here. So
That's cool.
and they're like, so there's the Blue Bottle, and then there's going to be us right next door, just
That's
right
awesome.
facing the Grand Central Market. I was like, oh, I can't say no. It was one of those, I can't say no to this. This is so
Yeah.
cool.
It's like that Larkspur location where you're like, it was just so cute. You're like, it's the
Yeah.
Bradbury building. Like,
Yeah, it was. And like it was because we had actually, it was like the last thing we looked at on this 2-day whirlwind tour of looking at spots. And it wasn't even on the agenda, but the realtor was like, actually, let's also, I want to take you over to here. And we had looked at the one in Los Feliz, had been the front runner, but I was like, this is good. I'm not like completely swooning, but like this could work. I feel like this could work. And then when we looked at the Bradbury, and I was also, I'm like, well, maybe this is going to be like an astronomical amount of money. And then they wanted a reasonable amount of rent. It was like, well, okay, well, this is amazing, but we have to be making the I can't just have an outpost without a bakery. And they're like, well, you could put the bakery here. I'm like, I'm not putting venting an oven in a historic building. That just sounds like a nightmare to get through the planning department. Yeah. And I don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. I'm like, this definitely needs to be an outpost. So we got to make the bagel somewhere. So I'm like, you know what? All right, let's take that spot. We'll take this spot. Let's go. So we're going to be coming in with those two, and hopefully around December if things go well, otherwise early next year.
Awesome. Well, I'm super excited, and maybe we can meet in person one time if you're here in LA for more than a whirlwind, tour. Obviously, I know you'll be busy whenever you're here, but I'd love to meet you in person. And I'll share, I'm going to be in San Francisco soon, so I'm hoping I want to bring my family to get some bagels. I hope we're not going to be too far from an outpost. But the official last question on the sheet was, what is your vision now? Has it changed? But I think we've covered that. It's still build a bagel empire.
Take over the empire. Yeah.
Yeah. Take over the world with your awesome bagels. I'm just like so excited for you, rooting for you. Like, I just love watching what you're doing, eating your bagels and chatting with you. So we've been here for almost for an hour and 10 minutes. So I'm gonna wrap it up. But thank you so much, Emily, for continuing to share your story with us and your amazing product. And just thanks.
You're welcome. I love your podcast. It's super interesting. Yeah, love discussing all this, and the numbers end is a lot of fun for me. So it's fun to have more places to discuss it and think about it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye.
You can hear more of Sarah's conversation with Emily by becoming a BABOYOT member. When you join, you'll get bonus content from this episode, like the culture Emily wants to create for her 140 plus employees, and also why she's so comfortable saying no. So to hear the rest of this conversation, as well as unlock benefits like live coaching and networking events, having your brand highlighted right here on the podcast, and beta testing new tools from the Good Food CFO, become a BABOYOT member today by visiting thegoodfoodcfo.com and clicking on membership.
Thank you for joining us here today. If you enjoyed this episode or found it helpful or inspiring in any way, please share it with your founder friends on social and rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. It's the #1 way to help good food founders find the show. We'll be back with a brand new episode next week.